Okay. Hello, everybody, to our second video-based Fedora Council meeting. We're still working out all the technical details of doing all these kind of things. And also, there's gigantic construction next to me. They're like power washing the steps, and it's incredibly loud. So I'm hiding out in the quietest corner of my house, and I'll probably spend most of the time on mute because they briefly stopped right now, but who knows when their lunch will be done. The primary focus of this meeting is going to be a presentation from Stephen Gallagher about the 3 editions or flavors or whatever else we want to or can or cannot call them, and basically the status of that and what the plan is for Fedora 23 and so on. So I guess I will turn it right over to Stephen.
Hello, folks. Just take one more moment. I need to quit out of IRC because the notifications are getting very loud. All right. So, Matthew, did you publish? I sent to the Hangout page a set of the slides that I'm going to be using. So, if people don't want to see the pixelated Google Hangout version,
I'll send. I can send it in a second.
Okay.
To IRC.
In the meantime, I will get my screen share going.
Okay, I posted it. We still need Matt to post the YouTube link, though.
Ah.
Got it?
So, before I proceed, is everyone seeing the slides?
Yes, all good to go.
All right. Okay, so as previously mentioned, we are going to be talking today a little bit about the progress that we've made towards developing these 3 Fedora editions. So, as you probably are aware, we started out in Fedora 21. We built a new series of processes around distributing 3 different major revisions of Fedora. The first of these was Cloud, the second Workstation, and the third Server. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what our goals were, and then I'll move on to where we've gotten. So, at a high level, we set out to solve some pretty specific needs in Fedora. First of all, we wanted to have a place where all of the different constituencies that make up the Fedora project could have a place to have a voice. One of the things that had happened over time as Fedora had gotten moved on, it was starting to lose the voice of the server and IT folks that had really started the process in Red Hat Linux. It had become very much a desktop-focused distribution, and while that is certainly an excellent market to be in, it wasn't our only. It shouldn't have been our only focus, and it was starting to turn into that way. And one of the problems that I was hearing from a lot of our contributors was that for those who wanted to use Fedora on servers and use Fedora for infrastructure pieces, they were feeling like their contributions to Fedora amounted to nothing but stop energy. It was saying things like, no, 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 you can't do this because that's not secure, or no, 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 you can't do this because it opens up too much it's too focused on the desktop. And so when we stopped and took a look at that, we realized one of the things that we needed to be able to do was to be able to let some of these groups not just have what they were looking for, but actually be able to develop on it. And so we decided to start splitting the Fedora project into the workstation focus, targeted around, well, I'll talk more specifically about its targets as we get along. And then a server focused for our more traditional IT people. And then also we wanted to be taking a look at the present and the future. And that was where we came up with this idea for Fedora Cloud as well, a specific group in Fedora focused tightly on building the next infrastructure as a service, platform as a service features for Fedora. We wanted to make sure that we had these high-level additions because it allows us to go out and tell people, yes, Fedora is for servers, Fedora is for cloud, and get a series of new contributors into the Fedora project. People that previously would have thought, I'm going to go work on this other distribution, I'm going to contribute some time to CentOS, or I'm going to contribute some time to Ubuntu. We wanted them to start realizing that Fedora was for them too, that it wasn't just about a desktop or a set of desktops, that it was really about all of these things. And with cloud, we were going to address these major new market segments. So with those high-level goals, we had a number of release engineering challenges that we were going to need to meet. First off, we wanted to be able to produce different install media. We wanted to be able to have the Fedora Cloud product effectively, or edition, and the Fedora Workstation edition, and the Fedora Server edition. But we also wanted to make sure that we weren't shipping different distributions. We want to make sure that the Fedora project is still one project. We still all are working to the same goals with the same people, sharing whatever we can to reduce maintenance burden and so on. And so we really needed some ways to make some individual changes, some individual software defaults, for example, and somehow we did that where we've made some new packaging techniques, and we had a false start with that in Fedora 21. I came up with one mechanism that ultimately was perhaps too clever for its own good. It relied on too much esoteric, low-level knowledge of the depth solving system, and ultimately broke when things didn't behave exactly as we expected them to. So we've gone and we've redesigned that in Fedora 22 to a version that is hopefully going to prove to be much more resilient. But it allows us to have a different set of defaults, so that those server folks that were feeling, like stop energy, no, you can't open all of the ports. That's insecure. Well, for the Workstation group, they can open the set of ports that they feel are necessary for a good user experience, whereas for the server, we can set up a default and only open the minimum set of ports necessary to administer the system and let you open things from there. Beyond that, we have other capabilities like which sets of services we want to have running, because on a server you probably want to, or a cloud environment, you want to have the minimum set of things going on at any particular moment. In the cloud case, it's especially important because you're paying for every CPU second and every bit of RAM that you purchase. And the last piece of release engineering that we really needed to focus on, well, actually there's two more. I missed one on the slide, but we wanted to be able to support branding these deliverables. So when you got an installer or a live media, you saw that this was Fedora Workstation. It wasn't just Fedora. We wanted you to know right up front, this is Fedora for you. This is Fedora for the use case that you want to put it to. And so that required a number of additional changes that had to be made to the installer and to the packaging system to allow us to, and the compose system, to be able to generate these install media and make them look similar. They needed to be, they needed to have a common theme, but they needed to be able to tell the users that these were these specific editions. And I have actually been going into a lot of my detail that I should have been jumping ahead on these slides. So I covered the version configuration, the branding, the software configuration. File system layout was another major piece that I didn't discuss there, which required a number of changes to the Anaconda installer to allow each of the products now ships a special package called a product image package, and it contains the branding, and it contains now some extensions that can be made, essentially a plugin to Anaconda to allow us to set the file system defaults and set which environment group, which set of packages we're going to install. And that was a really handy thing that was unfortunately not available in Fedora 21. So everything in Fedora 21 shipped with the same default file system with the exception of Cloud, which was producing its own custom cloud images, so they could do some of that already. But as of Fedora 22, the Fedora Workstation is shipping with ext4 on LVM for its default partitioning system, and the Fedora server will be shipping with XFS as the default file system, taking its cue from Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which made that same shift in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. And I did actually miss one thing on these slides. The other major piece for release engineering that they needed to work out was, as we split these install trees, we had to manage how we were going to handle the mirroring for these things, how were we going to enable net installs to work. So there was, I'm not going to pretend to be personally involved in how that worked out. Much of that was done by Dennis Gilmore, Peter Robinson, and the rest of the release engineering team, as well as help from the Anaconda folks and Kevin Fenzi and the other infrastructure people. Suffice to say, I heard a fair amount of grumbling because it was a much bigger problem than we originally anticipated. But I do want to congratulate all of the people involved in actually getting that to work, and for the most part, getting that to work back in Fedora 21. I haven't seen a great deal of difficulty this time around, excepting with some of the stuff going on with Fedora Atomic, which is still kind of in its infancy as far as a Fedora feature. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So, changes that had to go to QA during this process. One of the things we identified when we started the 3-edition project was that if we were going to manage this many different deliverables, we weren't going to be able to do it if we continued with QA the way we had been, which was very manual, almost entirely volunteer. And so one of the problems we had was that QA resources were very limited. We had to they were basically always playing catch-up. They had built up a technical debt of probably years. And so when we started the 3-edition process, what we did was we actually delayed the entrance into the full-on development process. We gave an extra 3 months, I think, at the beginning of the process, where we told QA, catch up on some of your technical debt, work on some of your automation, work on some of the ways that you can get a lot of the manual work out of the way, so that we will have the ability to actually test all of this stuff that we're developing. So during this time period, a lot of effort has gone into projects like Taskatron and AutoQA, which have been major enhancements. Adam Williamson, in particular, also put together a new mechanism with the WikiTCMS stuff, so that we can keep track of our tests and people can submit test results very easily and without the traditional wiki problems of collisions. On top of that, with these new additions, we had a whole bunch of new release criteria because, of course, Workstation needs to have a set of things that have to work in order for us to deliver Workstation. Server has a whole bunch of new features that need to have their own criteria and we have to establish that they work, that they operate from the previous version, and so on. So with that, again, that increased the burden, but with the additional automation, we were able to, if not entirely neutralize that, at least bring it down to a manageable increase. At which point, we started asking that each of the different edition SIGs, the special interest groups, needed to be contributing some degree of testing resources themselves. They needed to have people that were on the working groups agreeing to assist with the release validation and the beta testing and the alpha testing, so that we didn't end up in the position we were in Fedora 21 and Fedora 20, where too small of a QA team was dealing with release candidate after release candidate, trying desperately to get things out at the end. 3 or 4 people doing the jobs of 20 or 30 QA people. So this part has not been as much of a success as I would have liked. There have been some resources that have helped with the QA testing, but I know from my conversations with Adam and with Mike that they would very, very much like to see more coming from the SIGs here. There's it's been manageable, but these guys are going to need a vacation soon. So let's talk a little bit about the individual editions. I'm going to start with the Workstation, primarily because they were the first ones to get back to me when I was making up these slides. So what have we got so far? What changes have we made in Fedora 21 and 22 from Fedora, the former project, or the Fedora Legacy? I guess I don't have a real good term for Fedora pre-edition, but so working towards their stated goals of dealing with, of addressing the developer use case first and foremost, and I think the Workstation motto right now is good for everyone, perfect for developers. So they don't want people to get the misunderstanding that it's no longer a general purpose desktop, just that the engineering work that is going into it is going to focus on a specific set of users who are developers, which is really a superset of, yeah, it really is a superset of the needs of an average developer. So of the things that they've been working on for the last year now are better notifications and use of screen real estate. Basically, they've managed to, they've listened to the users and they've realized that the GNOME desktop needed a better notification system. It was having the things in the top and the bottom of the screen meant that there was actually less usable space, and so developers were telling them, hey, we prioritize the available space, and having things popping up and interfering with where we're doing our work is unacceptable. So, or is not ideal. So they heard that and they've improved on it. Fedora is pretty much first in the world with the level of Wayland integration that we've been working on. From what I understand it, Fedora contributors are one of the largest contribution groups to the upstream Wayland projects, and in Fedora 22, we're actually now turning Wayland on by default, at least for the login prompt. And the reason for that is it's a step towards getting Wayland in as the default for the desktop entirely, but it's a good place to see where things go wrong, whether or not certain hardware experiences problems. And if we limit it to the login screen, then we at least have a place where it can be easily turned off and people can continue working with the X server if they need to. Going forward, another thing that the Workstation team has been working on is GNOME software, which is essentially an app store, for lack of a better term. Although we don't, nothing in GNOME software costs money. So I guess app installer, app store is probably the best term, at least for users to understand. It's a great little, it's a great tool that's well integrated with the GNOME shell that allows people to just figure out whatever it is that they need to do. Just start typing into the search bar, have a one-click install, and everything it installs everything you need. It's a lot more user-friendly than the earlier graphical package managers like GNOME Package Kit or Yamex and so on. It's not. It is no longer about packages. It's about software, and that is an important distinction that users have been finding extremely interesting. Not to focus entirely on GNOME, the Workstation SIG has been working on common theming between the two most popular desktops in Fedora, which are GNOME and KDE, the latter of which will be shipping its very first Plasma 5 release in Fedora 22, which is essentially KDE 5, although I'm told that KDE Upstream doesn't like calling it that. And finally, as far as features that we've got, Dev Assistant has been getting excellent reviews as a great way to bootstrap a developer environment for a number of languages, including Python and C, and integrating it with GitHub and all sorts of nice little not terribly interesting on their own, but in aggregate, really powerful tools to just make it easier to do your development on Fedora than pretty much any other platform. So a lot of excellent work has been done there. So looking towards the future, certainly there are going to be plenty of additional tweaks and enhancements to the GNOME shell, but from the workstation perspective, some of the things that are going to be really interesting coming up are what I've got written here is non-comps application stacks, which is word salad, and I shouldn't have put it in this slide. What it basically amounts to is it would be nice to be able to deploy software onto a Fedora workstation that doesn't have to necessarily have its complete stack built in the same traditional Fedora manner of, if you want this chunk of software, you install this comps group, this yum group install or DNF group install my software. We want to have be able to leverage the power of GNOME software, but install entire application stacks from the bottom up, so that they may or may not so that they don't necessarily have to conflict with the version that we've decided to ship as the core in Fedora. Some of this is already being explored with stuff like the with Coppers, which was another. Coppers was an kind of a take on Ubuntu PPAs, where we have these external repositories that users can create and maintain software in. And we're now exploring with the Playground initiative some of these external applications, being able to install them with GNOME software. So these would be some examples of non-comps application stacks, stuff that we, for one reason or another, can't necessarily include in pristine Fedora, maybe because it requires a slightly different version of a library, or it's still experimental, and we don't want to, we don't want most users running into risks. But there's a lot to be done there, and it's going to be very interesting to see where that goes. Another feature that's being looked into are rollback capabilities. There are a lot of technologies out there right now that are being explored for this. Some of the most interesting ones are Fedora Atomic, or Project Atomic, which is an atomic upgrade and rollback system that's being used right now for the Docker host cloud image that we're producing and bare metal image. And then there's also other technologies out there, such as Snapper or Snappy, and those are all being evaluated. And as well as innate capabilities of Btrfs, once Btrfs is declared ready for general purpose use. So the workstation has certainly got an interesting future ahead of it, and I think a lot of that wouldn't have been possible without giving it the room to grow that the edition process is doing. So I think that's been a step in the right direction. Next up, let's talk about the Cloud SIG and the Cloud Edition. So again, I mentioned before that the purpose of the Cloud SIG, the Cloud Edition, is to address the infrastructure as a service and platform as a service needs of the future. In order to do this, some of the things that they've been doing in the past for Fedora 21 and 22, there's been a big focus on reducing the image size, the minimum amount of Fedora that you can put somewhere to get something useful done. A major part of this was they split the kernel, the set of kernel modules up into an absolute minimum set of kernel modules, and then a set that is more general purpose for the server and the workstation, which I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I want to say it's been dropped by about half since Fedora 20, and someone can chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, I guess I'm not. Good.
Yeah, sounds good enough.
Okay. Good. A lot of other work similar to that is we've built up this Docker base image. This is the if you were to go on any x86-64 Docker host and install Fedora, just give me a piece of Fedora. This has become a real focus now for the Fedora Cloud Group. It's become something, and it was originally part of the base design group, but the cloud project absorbed it for their own use, for their own needs, and because the expertise was in that group as well. And this is a very carefully curated set of. It's very close to the cloud image in that it's a very small, simplified set of foundational packages for Fedora that you can pull into a Docker image, into a Docker host, and then just start deploying on something that is basically Fedora, and something that we are comfortable calling Fedora. Whereas in the past it was kind of a best effort from interested parties in the community. Moving on from that, Fedora has partnered with Project Atomic, which is to build the Atomic host for Docker, which is it's atomic in that it has a read-only. It's essentially a read-only, atomically updatable host that its only purpose there is to run as many Docker images as possible and manage them sanely. So I'm not going to go too far into that. It's been talked up at every conference I can think of for the last year. So if you want to know more about that, go to projectatomic.io. Some additional capabilities that the cloud group has been working on are automatic submission of Amazon images. So whenever we do a release now, we basically publish, whenever we do a pre-release, and I believe we're now doing refreshes on a regular basis, these will just get pushed immediately to Amazon and made available to anyone who's deploying in the Amazon cloud, which makes us much easier to get access to Fedora. So we have an opportunity there to be your first choice again. Whereas previously, the only thing, you go to Amazon, you ask for Linux, you see Amazon Linux, you'd see, RHEL CentOS, and you'd see Ubuntu, and you'd have to dig to find Fedora. So now we're back in play there.
Also, we're not doing the regular scheduled updates yet. There's wish to do that, but not all the details have worked out. We basically, at this point, do ad hoc updates when there's a security problem, but not otherwise.
Okay, so that's good to know. I will have to keep track of that.
I want to mention that later.
I'm sorry?
Is it also worth mentioning Vagrant, or is that worth mentioning later?
Let's discuss that a little bit later. In short, I don't have I don't know very much about that, and it was not in the feedback I received from the Cloud SIG when I requested information for this talk. So, just to brush quickly through the rest of this, because I'm getting a little behind in my planned time to talk. We have a feature called we tongue-in-cheek have been referring to as Adopt Your Cattle, which is the ability to take a Fedora Cloud image that's been deployed into Amazon or another cloud engine, and promote it to the full Fedora server experience, which contains a lot more packages and has a base for producing certain infrastructure pieces. So it's the idea being that this is no longer a toss it out and replace it quickly. This is a curated and cared for system that just happens to be running inside somebody's cloud. And then user reproducible image generation, again, a bit of word salad, is basically the ability to publish how we generate all of our images so that anyone that wants to can regenerate the same images or modify them and generate images that are very similar to ours. So that's useful for the community at large, particularly if anyone wanted to build a cloud image spin. For the near future, the Cloud SIG is going to be working heavily on improvements to Project Atomic, which I talked about a little bit before. And then they're also going to have, in the next few weeks, they're going to revisit their PRD, which has gotten a bit stale as the world has changed around their original goals, and they're going to figure out exactly what it is they're going to be delivering for Fedora 23. And then we'll probably have I'll probably have one of the Cloud SIG guys do a small follow-up like this in a few weeks once they've done that. Server SIG, near and dear to my heart. For Fedora 21 and 22, our primary focuses have been on three major new features. The first and the most visible has been the Cockpit admin console. It's a great little UI tool that allows us to deliver Fedora Server in a completely headless environment and still give you a useful GUI, a means to interact with the system that gives you information, allows you to manage a lot of the common features, things like storage, networking, check the logs, join it to a domain, and so on. And it's been extremely well received. It's been getting a lot of good press, and it's one of the things that has put Fedora Server back on the map. It's also very interesting. It's now been adopted for use managing Docker containers on the Atomic project. So it's so the Cockpit project has become kind of a cross edition effort at this point. But it began in Fedora Server, and certainly will be continuing to improve there. The other two are, we built a new system for deploying infrastructure services that we're calling RoleKit. We just delivered a domain controller role based on the free IPA identity management system in Fedora 21, which essentially allowed us to roll out a competitor to Active Directory with almost no effort on the end user side. We're going to be improving how that works as we go forward. We're going to be adding that feature to Cockpit, and I'll talk about that again on the next slide. But right now, it is easier than ever to get a fully featured identity management system up and running in just a few minutes with only a pair of commands. Similarly, in Fedora 22, we built up a database server role built on Postgres, one of the more popular open source database systems, and we can actually build any number of them onto this system. You can spin up a Fedora server system and put 13 different databases on this same machine and manage them through RoleKit. I think this one hasn't really hit the field yet, so we're cautiously optimistic that people are going to appreciate this. But the real goals here are, we want RoleKit to be a way that you can easily get infrastructure set up for a small and medium business. If you're just starting, you've just hired your third or your fifth employee, and you really just want to start doing things the enterprisey way, but not go all the way into expensive systems, then you should be deploying with RoleKit. Just get these things up and running. Things that we're working on going forward. We have a lot of interesting stuff that we're going to be working. One of the things that I want to be working on with the free IPA upstream is the ability to deploy domain controller replicas. Right now, we can only deploy essentially the first domain controller. After that, replica management is rather manual. So I'd like to be able to do that. Another common piece of infrastructure that most environments will need, especially those running web applications, is a memcache server, which is a very simple role. And what we're probably going to do is use that as a prototype for releasing Docker-based roles in Fedora Server 23. A long-term goal is to build a reasonable file sharing role that will function for setting up and managing NFS and Samba shares for your network, so that you can stand up a Fedora server and make it a storage server, and not just necessarily NFS or Samba, but we also want to be able to manage as an iSCSI target and as and potentially as a Gluster or Ceph server. So there's a lot to be done there, and I'm not sure I'm sure that's not going to be in 23, but that's on the roadmap. Cloud storage host role, Ceph and Gluster and the like. Another thing that we're planning to do starting in 23 is start documenting and keeping in a common location a set of APIs that we consider stable and that we will guarantee as part of our core platform for at least 2, probably 3 Fedora releases. this is to work around the classic problem that the classic question Fedora server gets, which is, well, are you going to have an LTS? And the answer is probably not. But what we are going to, because what we want to do is solve the core problem of an LTS, which is that you want a system for which you can write a piece of software and expect it to run for 18, 24, 36 months. That's a very different question from will you lock the platform down so that no changes happen in that time period. So we're going to start trying to document how we can do that and what things our consumers can use in order to get that sort of LTS feel, but still be able to continue upgrading stably. So that's pretty much where we're going to go for the next few releases. What's next for Fedora Editions? So in Fedora 23, I'm putting a call out to all of the working groups, and that's cloud, server, workstation, base, and environments and stacks. That it's time. We've gone 2 releases. It's time that we all had another look at the original PRDs we published, and I think we need to revise them, establish whether or not any of the ideas that we had in it were flawed or need to be rethought out. I know that the cloud folks are planning to do a major change in this. I think I can only speak for server otherwise, where we've got some things that sounded good at the time, but are probably going to change. We need to have ways to improve our communication, and I think things like this, where if we have each of the editions.
Is there a timeline for that PRD update that we're expecting?
We haven't set an exact date yet. I actually wouldn't mind having that conversation at the end of this call. Okay. With the council.
All right, I'll let you go on.
It needs to be in advance of the change submission date. At least a week, preferably 2, before the change submission date.
And that is the end of June. So okay, right. We'll get to that later. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. We have to look into ways to improve communication, because I think that's one of the things we have. We've done better than we have in past Fedoras, in part because one of the side effects to having all of these groups is that we now have a set of defined people that you know to go to when you have a question about a particular target. However, we haven't always been good about communicating our intentions cross-team as well, and I think perhaps doing more of these video updates will allow us to get that feedback out to people. And further, again, for QA's benefit, I think we really need to be focusing on even more automated testing. Some of the things that we've been talking about in server meetings that I want to expand to a wider audience too are, as a side effect of some of the stable API stuff we're doing, we want to build a set of Taskatron or AutoQA tools that will do ABI checks for every commit. We want to keep an eye on, or I should say, in every body update. We should not allow ABI changes to happen in stable releases, and we should be checking them at least once at branch to see if things are changing between releases as well. And I think if we can automate a lot of that, then we can reduce a lot of the churn that people see, and again further reduce the need for something like an LTS. So this is where I was going to leave room for questions. Sorry if I blew through the last few slides, but I wanted to make sure there was enough time for questions.
I've been following this closely, so I don't have a lot of questions. I'm going to try and turn on the Hangouts on Air Q&A feature to see if that causes anything to happen. Oh, no, this feature is disabled. Okay, so that means for people who have questions, we have the IRC channel, or I guess you can Google Hangouts them, or Google. Yeah, the IRC channel is probably the best. It's the Fedora meeting on Freenode. I think that probably most active Fedora people are used to that. hopefully new people will become accustomed to it quickly. It's pretty much our backbone of communications in Fedora, even as we're trying these new things.
Right.
And I guess council members, of course, can throw out questions in the Hangout here.
Right. So perhaps while we wait to see if any questions come up in IRC, we could have that quick discussion about PRD revisions that came up. And I think Langdon also had mentioned he had another question to ask about Vagrant, or something to bring up about Vagrant.
Yeah, I mean, so basically there was a change proposal made for F22 that we would have Vagrant boxes for kind of the cloud SIG. So not only kind of boxes available that you could deploy on a public cloud, but also ones that you could deploy in using Vagrant on a local machine. Vagrant is now also in Fedora, so you can use it. So that makes it a little easier, at least the client side. If you're not familiar with Vagrant in and of itself, check out vagrantup.com, and you can kind of see what it's for. But basically, it's a kind of a generic way of letting you share development environments amongst people. And that's basically what I wanted to bring up, and we're hoping that for F23 that we will have more versions of Fedora Editions available for Vagrant, so you can use kind of the rest of them. If that makes sense.
Sure, that sounds good. Thank you. All right, on the topic of the PRD reviews, so what is it, Matthew, did you say what the schedule was for?
Yeah, it's June 23rd is currently scheduled, so it's basically a month and a week.
Right. So to my mind, we probably want to have, looking at the calendar, we probably want to have the PRDs submitted for at least review no later than, I'd say, the 12th. So people have a week and change between it, so that they can for feedback, particularly if anything controversial comes up.
And like a week after the release itself, the Fedora 22 release comes out, to catch our breath, get work on the planning for the next one, go. That's pretty much the Fedora process.
Yes. Wait, we're gonna let them catch their breath this time?
For a week, isn't that fair?
All right. So shall we settle on that then? Just say PRD review due by end of business, or 2359 UTC, June 12th.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Why don't you put a message to the Fedora Council list and say late call for lazy consensus for that, and then we'll see if anybody objects.
Sure. Will do. So, did any questions come up in the Fedora meeting, or?
No, it's mostly Remy talking to himself. Thank you, Remy. There'll be a nice transcript for later as well.
All right.
Any questions from anybody else?
I'm not sure if it came up, but do we want to mention the objective here?
Oh, sure, go for it.
You would have to ask me to do it.
I'm sure that sounded like a volunteer.
So the other kind of sort of related to this is I proposed a new objective regarding kind of what's next for this stuff, to try to talk about how do we further modularize Fedora kind of beyond the editions component. Feel free to go comment on that, and I am currently looking for the link because I can't remember the number.
26, I posted it already.
Oh, you're smart. The one of the comments on there is actually to kind of start to write up phase 2 and 3, which I think I will probably be doing soon, as well as to start to do maybe some prototyping of some of the ideas we have, even in advance of requirements. And so we'll try to write those up as well. So as they say, watch this space. But I just kind of want to give the update on that objective. It's making progress, and I think it's important to this group.
Yes, definitely. So for people who aren't quite following along with this, the objectives are basically our strategic planning for the medium term. These are basically things taking place over 12 to 18 months. And so we have several of those active at a time. This 3 editions thing is one of them for right now. That's what Stephen has been working on. And so this is sort of a next thing that's kind of a different area that we're looking at for the future of Fedora. And so you can find this, I'll say the URL out loud because that's always awesome, fedorahosted.org/council/ticket/26. And that's where this proposal is for this next idea, basically for how we can modularize Fedora and gathering requirements for that, because we kind of have a general sense that it would be better for a lot of different problems if Fedora were more modular in some way, but we've been kind of vague about what those problems are and what the solutions might be, so this is kind of a more formalized approach to that. So check that out if that's interesting to you.
All right. Well, I have nothing else to add.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you, everybody. And I think next week we are doing the meeting should be back in IRC only to deal with some of our ticket-based work and kind of make sure we're moving forward on those kind of things. And then we will have a Google Hangout-based meeting in the future with Fedora QA, and I'll post to the mailing list about that. Goodbye, everybody.